this is Dr. Martin. I'm calling in from Greenwood, Mississippi.
Good morning, Dr. Martin.
All right.
Good morning, this is Eddie Fraser. I'm calling that.
Good morning. We haven't done a roll call yet. We're just about to get started. All right, good morning. I'm Heather Westerfield, Chair of the Commission on School Accreditation. This special call meeting of the Commission on School Accreditation is being held today, Monday, August 19th, 2019, at 10 a.m. in the 4th floor boardroom, Central High School Building, 359 Northwest Street, Jackson, Mississippi. An audio recording is being made of this meeting, and minutes of this meeting will be recorded. This meeting is also being live streamed. Access to the live stream can be found on MDE's webpage. Commission members, please remember to speak directly into the microphones so that those watching the live stream can hear clearly. As I call the names of the commission members, please state the location of your presence for this meeting. Kelly Barfield.
Present, Vicksburg, Mississippi.
Sean Brewer.
Present, Madison Central High School.
Annie Bush. Sarah Foster.
Present, 4th floor boardroom.
Roy Gill.
Present, Gulfport, Mississippi.
Brian Harvey.
Present, Oxford, Mississippi.
Michael Lindsay.
Present, 4th floor boardroom.
Dr. Valencia Martin.
Present, Greenwood, Mississippi.
John Mistelis.
Present, the Oxford High School.
Anthony Montgomery.
Present, Hancock Whitney Plaza, Gulfport, Mississippi.
Eddie Prather.
Present, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Brad Stevens.
Present by phone, calling from Monroe County.
Ingrid Williams.
Present, Jackson, Mississippi.
Heather Westerfield, 4th floor boardroom. Quorum of the commission is present for the purpose of conducting this meeting. This meeting is called to order at 10:04 a.m. Item 2, commission members, you've received a copy of the agenda. Please note this is the special called meeting, and therefore the only business that can be transacted is that which has been specified in the call of this meeting. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the agenda. Please identify yourself for the record.
Mike Lindsay, so moved.
Eddie Fraser, second.
Second by Mr. Prather. Is there any discussion? Okay, I will call for a vote for members present and then for members that are calling in. So members present, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Members on the phone, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. All right, item 3, consideration of the vote of the assessment task force and the results of the teacher survey regarding the continuance of the U.S. History end of course exam. Today with us we have Dr. Tim Martin, co-chair of the assessment task force, and he will present the results of the teacher survey. Dr. Martin, thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank y'all for having me, and I'm sorry for making you a little bit tardy in getting here. I'm here to present the overview of the work of the task force. As a member of that committee, I had two very capable co-chairs. They were Dr. Benita Potter and Ms. Rachel Cantor, and I'll show you a slide that shows you all the members of the task force in just a second. We want to give you an overview of our task force work that we started over the past year, and my review will be a brief summary of those works and findings. We kept the State Board of Education's vision and mission at the heart of our work, as all the work of the department is done. The work of the task force aligned specifically to goals 1 and 2, all students being proficient and showing growth in all areas that were assessed, and number 2, that every student graduates from high school that is college and career ready. It also touched on some of the other goals, but those were the two main ones that it did that. Testing is always a measure in that, and so the U.S. history test in particular was what we came up with, but we'll get to that in just a second. Standards and assessments that we have in our state, I think first of all, for all commission members and anyone listening, it's important to understand the purpose of testing. And we spent a lot of time at the testing task force talking about what the purpose of testing really was. And a lot of times in the public talk of just testing, that gets lost. The purpose of testing is to measure what is being taught in the classroom. And as long as we've had schools, and I think as long as we will have schools, there's going to be tests in schools. It's a way that we have a uniform measure that looks across schools and school districts, and it's a way that we can measure that students are effectively being taught both in classrooms and across schools and across districts. So a lot of times in the political realm and others, the talk gets talked about, testing, too much testing. I think we need to be centered in that there is a purpose for testing. If testing is used to drive instruction.
Hello, did we have someone join us?
Can we ask the members on the phone to please mute your phone unless you have a question, because we're getting some extraneous noise.
Okay. Without some uniform measure, though, we don't know, how students are doing academically. And so that was at the heart of what we looked at. So we came up with 3 goals for the task force. They were to determine the types, the quality, and amount of tests students take on the state and district level, to provide recommendations on ways to ensure that student testing is streamlined but measures the learning goals designed by Mississippi teachers, and third, to discover and recommend best practices for student testing on the state and district level. We met, our first meeting was June the 19th of 2018, and we met some 9 or 10 times over the past year, and those are all recorded and are part of the record. Our task force members, you see here on the first slide, and as I've already mentioned, Dr. Panita Coleman-Potter from Ocean Springs and Rachel Cantor were my co-chairs. And then here are the other members of the task force. We started off our work with looking at a summary of the required assessments, and we broke those into three different categories. Those required by state law, that the legislature has passed some type of legislation requiring those. Those required by the federal law, ESSA, as a part of our ESSA plan, and then those that were required just by state board policy. And you can see there that the kindergarten readiness assessment, the dyslexia screener, the universal screeners we use in K through 3, and the 3rd grade reading gate are all in state law, as are Algebra 1, English 2, and biology. And then the ACT that juniors take. Those are all under some form of state legislation, so to change those would take legislation to change those. Federal law, you have our MAP, ELA and math in 3 through 8, our science 5th and 8th, our EL component that we have as part of testing, Algebra 1, English 2, and biology. And then our state board policy, you see U.S. history, you see the pre-K assessment, and that's if offered in pre-K. The pre-K assessment and the kindergarten readiness assessment are one and the same, but they're used at different times. The pre-K assessment, if you have a pre-K collaborative, it's used to judge the effectiveness of it. And then you also have the Brigance and then the ACT in the junior year. So very quickly we saw an overview of what the testing was required and who was requiring it of us. Next, we did a survey of districts in the state, and this was to get input from administrators and district leaders on their thoughts about testing. And then we came back at a later date, and I'll show you slides with that, and surveyed teachers, and we had two really good sets of data to look at difference between what administrators and school leaders thought about testing as opposed to what teachers felt about testing. We were saddened we didn't have 100% participation. Had only about 64% that responded, so 36% did not respond to this. But the data that did, was very important data. We found that A, B, and C districts had significantly higher response rates than our D and F districts. We don't really know the reasons behind that, but we had a higher response rate from our higher performing districts. The majority of the survey respondents used vendor-created assessments in their districts. And this goes to part of the job of the task force was not just looking at state tests and state testing, but the benchmark testing and things that districts use to get ready for the state test, okay? Because teachers look at that as one in the same. Testing is testing, and if it's taking time away from instruction to give a standardized test of some type, then they were putting that all in the same boat. So we wanted to look at both of those. So we were looking at, we knew what the state tests were. We also were looking at benchmark testing that districts use. And 95% of the respondents reported that their districts had used some type of vendor-created assessment in 2017-18 school year. The results of the survey that we did with districts and administrators, on the left side you see ELA, and on the right side you see math. Case 21 by TE 21 was the number one used or was the test that administrators and people felt had the most was the most helpful in benchmarking their students for the ELA test, closely by iReady, NWEA MAP, star rating, Dibbles, and there were other tests other than those, but they just didn't rise to a significance to be included in that chart. Then on math, you saw iReady and Case Math, Case Algebra 1, and you see there on the screen. There was a wide variety of tests that were used by districts as far as their benchmarking was concerned. On this next slide, you get to what are some of the issues with testing. And the number one issue that was found with administrators, and you'll see this again in the teacher survey, was technology. Technology issues with either district's broadband or vendor software. There was something wrong with the vendor software that was being used, or there were problems with devices or technology as far as bandwidth with schools using benchmarking. That shouldn't be any surprise because those are the same issues that we have with state testing when we do this statewide. Another issue that came up was the lack of available test-capable devices. And so that contributed to about 50% of the cause of districts taking longer time to take the test. All the students couldn't test on a single day because they didn't have devices. They had to rotate students either through a computer lab or through a mobile lab that was taken to classrooms, so that an individual teacher's time might not have been taken away tremendously, but the disruption to the school as a whole was greatly increased because of lack of devices. And again, we see that on the state test as well. There are some districts that every student can take it in the same test on a single day, and other districts, that's why we have windows for tests to be taken. Next, you see that students from A and F districts, on average, spent relatively more testing time on vendor-created assessments compared to students from other districts, and that was very surprising to us. You know but that A districts would spend that much time on benchmarking students. There is a kind of underneath the the results from the survey was that there was found really that a belief almost that benchmarking was some magic bullet, that by benchmarking my students X number of times during the year, that was going to make their state test results come out better. That is true if you use the results from that benchmarking to drive instruction. But if you're just giving tests just to be giving tests and not using the data to drive instruction, then it has no effect. Further, the analysis, C and D districts on average spent more time than other districts administering vendor-created tests. And so the correlation there, really holds true as well. We did a scatter plot showing ELA and math, and neither the students' testing time nor the district's administration time had a strong correlation with what they did on the state test. So really, to some of us that use benchmarking, that was kind of disheartening. It was kind of like, so why are we doing all this benchmarking if it's not having an effect on our state testing? A lot of that's, and so there were some recommendations that came out of the task force for districts on that. The same thing found true in math, that there was not a strong correlation between either the time students spent on benchmarking tests or the time that districts gave. There was not a strong correlation to improvements in their state tests. Once we had that data, and that survey was done through the department, and we did not, it was sent out to superintendents to be done in leadership teams, and so that survey was done through the department. Well, next the task force wanted to get the temperature of teachers, and so we worked with Mississippi State University to conduct a survey of every teacher in the state around their thoughts on testing. The Survey Research Laboratory, Social Science Research Center at MSU conducted a web-based survey of all public school teachers. MDE does not have a direct email access or addresses for every teacher, and as a result, the survey was conducted through a link was sent to the superintendents, and superintendents then sent those out to their teachers. And so that process likely impacted the response rate because some teachers did not complete the survey, maybe thinking it would be tracked back to them in some fashion, form or fashion, although that was not true. We did get, overall response rate was 32%, and while that is low when you're doing research, that is 10,000 teachers across the state that did respond. So when you look at the actual number, that is a powerful group. It's 10,000 teachers across the state that did respond. We had 15 school districts with no response, 30 school districts with less than 10% of teachers responding, and the number of teachers by school or district varied from 1 to 143, depending on the different district. The survey themes that were found, 3 things that jumped out from the teacher survey. Number 1, too much testing. And I think we've all heard that. I've heard that in my district, and I think we've all heard that, too much testing. This category includes comments referring to the amount of testing, the length of testing, and any general complaint that too much testing. And there was some open-ended questions that went on and on and on and on and on. Number 2, that there were bad tests and bad data, that some of the tests that were being used were not giving actionable data to teachers. And then the third one was really something that we took to heart, the stress of students. And I've seen this firsthand in my district, that students are stressed out with so much testing. And so all 3 of those were 3 big themes that came from the teachers. Number 4 and 5, loss of instructional time. Teachers felt like that they were having to spend an inordinate amount of time with test prep and getting ready for testing rather than being able to teach their curriculum. And then teacher stress. looking at it. And of course, I think teacher stress is correlated to student stress. When teachers are stressed, then it plays out and it can't help but affect students, and they become stressed. So those were the survey themes that we had from the teacher survey. Teachers were very appreciative across the state for the opportunity to share their perspectives. I think we all know that their thing was there was too much testing at both the state and district level. And the biggest challenge of student testing is it takes time away from daily instruction, according to teachers. Stress for teachers and students. There were significant differences between districts in the time to administer assessments. And then, of course, we come back to technology issues as well. So once we had those two big pieces of data, there was a part of us that we thought our work had completed. In March, we had a meeting, and we were going to come up with some recommendations for districts to guide them, not to require them. We have no authority to require them to do anything, but just to some recommendations on benchmarking and how many benchmarks should be conducted and those kind of things. And so the committee had their meeting, and we thought we were done. After that, several of the committee members started emailing each other and said, our work's really not done. We've heard the teachers' comments, but there's an elephant in the room, so to speak. When you look back at that chart of which tests could be eliminated, the only one that came to mind that could be eliminated without having to get legislative approval or having to go to the federal government with ESSA plan or those things was U.S. history. And so the task members felt like it was important to hear from teachers once again. And so we did a final poll, and that final poll was basically a one-question poll. It was just one single question. It was sent out to all high school teachers in the state, and the results were broken down as you see on the screen. U.S. history teachers, 73% said do away with it. The question was, should the U.S. history test be continued to be given as an end-of-the-course exam? That's not exactly the wording, but that's basically it. Yes or no? And so you see the results. 73% said no, and that was U.S. history teachers. History teachers other than U.S. history, so world history, U.S. government, those teachers, 74% said do away with it. And then all high school teachers in the group, 79%. So when you do those totals, 77% of high school teachers in this poll across the state, it was 3,000 plus of them that responded, said do away with the U.S. history test. So following that poll, the task force did their own poll of the members on the task force. And there was a 9-2 vote to bring the recommendation to the commission to do away with the U.S. history test. And you say, why? There's a lot more members on that task force than just 11. Why a 9-2 vote? I think when the poll came out and members saw the overwhelming response of the teachers, then they just didn't even take time to respond to the poll themselves. They said it's self-evident of what the decision should be. But the 11 people that did respond, there were 9 voted to do away with it, to recommend to you to do away with it, and 2 voted to keep it. Do you have any questions?
This is Eddie Prather. This might be a question and a comment, and the staff might can answer this. I see on the first, second, third slide you presented that all the different entities that require testing. And U.S. history, the only one that federal, state, local did not require. So why do we? Why are we just going to single the one that can get rid of the test that's dealing with the state law? Why not look at, if we're looking at too much testing, look at some of the state testing that we might go away with other than just picking U.S. history? Do you have any response to that?
Mr. Prather, I'll answer from the task force standpoint, and then the MDE department can answer from theirs. But from the task force standpoint, we looked at the authority that we had as a task force to recommend.
Okay.
And we didn't have authority to recommend, changes to ESSA plan or to state law, but we did have the authority to recommend U.S. history because it's only from state board policy. That was our standpoint from the commission. MDE can answer those others.
So I think Dr. Martin responded appropriately to that. I mean, if you're looking at the chart, you'll see that a number of assessments are required to comply with federal guidance, and then there are a number of assessments that are required in state law, which would certainly require a technical amendment to the statute to reduce testing in those areas.
Dr. Martin, this is Sean Brewer. I was just curious if there were any questions related to all the requirements on staff and such, whether test administrators, proctors that go into actually administering these tests, and how stressful and burdensome those things are also.
So, Mr. Brewer, I'm not sure. There could have been some conversation, I'm sure there was, at the task force meetings around that, but we do have a group of stakeholders that will be coming together. Actually, the first meeting is, I think, the 26th of August, and we'll assemble a small group related to assessment policy that will begin work around such requirements of the student testing handbook, the accommodations manual, Appendix F, all around test security. That core group will be led, the chair of that will be Dr. Matt Dillon, and then we will, at that first meeting, determine how we will include additional stakeholders in those revisions. So the short of the answer is yes, we are taking a look at those, all of those areas.
Super. I think you'll find that significant.
This is John Mistolis. A couple of comments. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm probably the only stakeholder on the board. I am a U.S. history teacher in Mississippi. I have either been state tested in U.S. history or English 2 and or AP tested all but 1 year of my 17-year plus career. And I've been blessed to teach at Oxford High School, a high school that most know that we don't hurt for resources or most things. But I've also been a teacher in some of the poorest counties in the state of Mississippi. And I've been successful everywhere I've been as a teacher, and feel as though I could go into any school in Mississippi and dramatically change their test scores positively in either one of those tests. And what I hear from the teachers from the U.S. History Group is this: we feel it's a double-edged sword. We feel that the only thing that makes social studies significant or looked at as being important is the fact that it is tested. And our fear is that if the test goes away, then the importance of social studies will eventually go away, whether it's 5 years, 20 years, 100 years. And so, being selfish as a humanities teacher, anything that can maintain the significance of what we do, because we think that what we do is vitally important to our students, of course we want to continue our significance as something that's important. But at the same time, not very many people that I speak to as stakeholders, direct stakeholders, as U.S. history teachers, are fans of the test. And so it's a double-edged sword. Is it the one thing that's going to keep us significant? And the second question is the test valid? And most of us think that the time element, of course, is very important. I teach in a school where all of our kids are one-to-one with computers. We have very competent administrators. We have competent teachers, so our testing goes very fluid. But I've also taught at schools where they didn't have access to computers and labs and things, and were on paper, and sometimes even people broke rules and administered and proctored their own tests, which is hard to believe that I once did that years ago, because it would never happen in today's world. But having said that, I voted to get rid of that state test, and the reason for it is I'd vote to get rid of all of them. If you go back to the chart that was just showed us, the only federal law that we have is that biology, algebra 1, and English 2 are required to be taught. Well, the ACT covers all three of those. Why doesn't the state of Mississippi get out of its ignorant past? And if we want to be forward thinking, why don't we save the taxpayers money, have the ACT score for every single school, completely take care of all three of those guidelines, and make everybody take the same test and do it once a year, and then have the rest of our time to have better instruction for our students. That's just how I stand. Nobody has to listen to anything I have to say, but I am a stakeholder, and I'm good at what I do, and I love what I do, and I love my students, and I want what's best for them. And I don't have to have a state test to know that my students are learning U.S. history. And so I think a lot, as we've seen with the teacher poll, 77, even non-U.S. history teachers are tired of the testing. We want to teach. We want to get in our rooms, and we want to teach. We don't want to have to be threatened with losing our license every 5 minutes of the day if we say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, stand the wrong way during the test. They're very specific and very demanding rules for those people that don't understand. If you're a proctor or test administrator, you can lose your license in about 3 seconds, not even knowing that you made a mistake. And so, is that the emphasis that we're putting on our students, or are we here to learn? So,
Okay.
all of my stuff, I would say, I'm totally for getting rid of that and making that the first of many things that we get rid of, and get to the ACT and save money and teach our kids better.
Thank you, Mr. Mislis, for those comments. I do want to remind the commission that we very well may be back here discussing all of these things again. What we're deciding today is simply we're going to take the task force recommendation and move on to school board so we can start the APA process. Of course, if it does go through, we might be back here figuring out a whole bunch of other things. So, but I just wanted to keep us focused that today our task is either to take the recommendation of the task force and move forward, or to not take the recommendation of the task force. So with that being said, of course, we'll welcome any other questions from commission members for Dr. Martin or Dr. Vanderford. Go ahead, Dr.
On this task force, Eddie Prather again. I know why all the things you all did. Now, let me commend you for the work that you put in. You got a lot of good information here. If we're looking at to reducing some of the issue with tests, one with the technology and the other the stress of teaching and students. So just to remove, make that recommendation, is that going to address those two areas?
Mr. Prather, I don't think that this one action, whether it goes through or not, is going to solve all of those issues with teachers. I think it starts the discussion, it starts the dialogue that will go forward from this day forward in the department, from the Commission on Accreditation and all the parties that be. And so we looked at our job as really getting that conversation started, getting input from as many teachers and administrators as we could, and we felt like we got even though we didn't get 100%, we did get a large enough sample to make some recommendations.
So, and Mr. Prather, I'll just add to that and circle back to the policy group stakeholders that are going to begin their work at the end of the month. All of those things that you mentioned will be part of the work of that group. I mean, our assessment policies are really outdated and particularly related to paper pencil testing.
Sorry, we're having a lot of feedback. Commission members, if you could mute your phones.
You need to go to the principal with this.
Mr. Mistelis. Mr. Mistelis. Mr. Mistelis, we can hear you send the kids to the principal's office. Do you mind muting your phone for us?
You know what? I have everything muted, and I don't know why it's not working. I apologize. I do about my students.
You do.
That was not a discipline. That was a student in need, so I was trying to get them. That was not a discipline situation. Hey, do we need a motion? Because I'm ready to make a motion right now.
I mean, If there are no other comments or questions from the commission,
Well, I have one
I'm sorry,
point of
Dr.
clarity.
Vanderford, yes, you weren't finished with your
Oh,
thought.
on the next couple of slides, I mean, Ms. Westerfield did a really good job of summarizing, but just a point of clarification that if the commission accepts the recommendation of the task force and moves it to the board to begin the APA process for the consideration to eliminate, that would not be effective for this current school year. I mean, the test will be, continue to be administered for the 1920 school year. So this consideration and APA process would be effective for the 2021 school year.
Can you give us some feedback on why that's the case?
Well, because because this decision is just not limited to, do we give the test or do we not give the test? It's, as all of you know, it's tied to a graduation requirement. It is in all of the rules of our assessment and accountability systems. It's in our ESSA plan as a component of the accountability system. So we would have to engage stakeholders, to Ms. Westerfield's point about if this issue does, this consideration, not an issue, but moves forward to the state board for the APA process and is finalized and approved after the APA process, then we've got to look at all of the state board policies around graduation requirements, submit an amendment to our ESSA plan, have the work of the accountability task force, to, you know, what do we do with those points that are attributed to U.S. history in the 1,000-point and district scale. So there's just a number of policy decisions that have to be made, and there's no way that we could implement that effective this school year.
Today, if it is the will and pleasure of the commission, we're just getting the ball rolling here. We're getting started on it. So certainly
Yes,
welcome.
this is Roy Gill, and I just had a question, and I think Dr. Vanderford just answered the question, because it will have a ripple effect, and there will be further discussion about the accountability model, having to resubmit our ESSA guidelines and all of that. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, we would move forward with the 1920 school year with the current policies that we have in place around the administration of the assessment and its inclusion in the assessment and accountability systems.
And we're still on target to roll out the new assessment this year. Am I correct?
Yes.
Is there been any talk of pausing that and reusing the old assessment, or is that already ship sailed?
No, that assessment is, I mean, it's completed. We'll have there's still some final processes, but it will be administered in November, mid-November for students on a 4x4. So we're on target with the new assessment.
Other questions from the commission? If not, I will open the floor up for a motion. Actually, if we go back to that slide previous, there would be our two options right there.
This is Kelly Barfield. I move to accept the recommendation of the testing task force and recommend the State Board of Education begin the Administrative Procedures Act process to eliminate U.S. history end of course assessment.
Good, okay, I have a motion by Ms. Barfield. Do I have a second?
So moved, Sarah Foster.
I heard Ms. I heard Ms. Foster. Is there any discussion? All right, I'll do members present first. So we have a motion to accept the recommendation of the Testing Task Force and recommend the State Board of Education begin the Administrative Procedures Act, APA process to eliminate U.S. history end of course assessment. Any discussion? Okay, members present, all in favor?
Madam Chair, this is Roy Gill.
Yes, sir.
once that goes out, will that be brought back before the commission to review the APA, or will it just stay at the board level, state board level?
That typically, remains at the state board, level.
Okay. All right, so, but they will look at the feedback, because there's a lot of, unintentional consequences as we go to moving forward with changing things and not knowing the repercussion. I just, I'm perfectly all right reducing the number of assessments, but we all have to be very cognizant of the ripple effect that it has on schools in today's world. So I just want to make sure that we all understand there are some unintentional consequences when we start removing things. I felt I needed to say that and make sure that we understand that there will be changes, and don't want it to come back, well, y'all didn't think about these changes when we made this recommendation. So, I mean, all the way from resubmission of ESSA, redoing the accountability, possibly set and cut scores, I mean, there's lots of unintentional consequences that we just need to, everyone make sure we understand that when we make this decision, what happens when it moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, members present, all in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Members on the phone, all in favor? Oppose? The motion carries. All right, item 4. Any other? Well, we can't do any other. That's right, we can't do any. So, all right, item 4. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Lewis.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Mistelis. Do I have a second?
Second,
Second by Mr. Montgomery. Members present, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Members on the phone, all in favor? Any opposed? And we stand adjourned at 10:44.